In fact, the name of your institute itself is very inspiring. Uh, in particular to me, you see, Graviton plays a very, very crucial role everywhere in the world of science, everywhere in the world, in nature, in the universe, everywhere. And also in my own personal life, I always think in terms of these objects like gravitons, and we would have about 40 minutes time to try to understand and try to discuss and talk among ourselves this very important concept of the so-called graviton. We would, of course, you are a student of this institute, and I am sure that all of you must have given some thoughts to what the meaning of this word graviton is. And as Mr. Madan said, I have little more experience than you people, so little more wisdom maybe in of some kind in some particular field. So let me try to give you my own thoughts on this topic called graviton. So I'm very sure that all of us know even better about the word photon. You see, without light, you cannot see anything. So photon plays that role in our life. The quantum of excitation of the electromagnetic field, and that is your photon. So graviton is just analogous to photon. It's a quantum of excitation of the gravitational field. So if we have these two fields, electromagnetic field, gravitational field, you see both of these interactions, gravitational interaction as well as electromagnetic and gravitational interactions both are long range forces. So practically they go all the way up to infinity, you see. Their presence, howsoever big they might become, but they are present. So they are described, both of them are described by the inverse square law. The Coulomb law is described by Q1, Q2 by R square in electrostatics or electromagnetics or electromagnetism, as you like to call it. And Newton's law of gravitation, M1, M2 by R square. Of course, we have the constant of proportionality, which is important by itself, given by capital G, the Newton's constant. So G into M1, M2 by R square. So you see, the as R increases, the force continues to be there, whether you notice it or not. Okay. So howsoever big it might become, but it's a long range force. Both of them are long range forces. So on the other hand, the other two interactions, you see, we have four fundamental interactions in nature. And they are also called synonymously fundamental forces of nature. So a strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force. The weak nuclear force is familiar to us when you studied something called beta decay of the neutron. And its general form is just decay of all particles, decay of all elementary particles. So that is your the weak nuclear force. And the strong nuclear force given by sort of QCD, quantum chromodynamics, strong interactions, this is a short range force. Also the weak nuclear force, this is also a short range force. Except these two, the electromagnetic and the gravitational forces, which are long range forces, the other two are short range forces. So how neutrons and protons talk to each other, how quarks talk to each other, that is given by the so-called strong interaction or the strong nuclear force. Okay. And what describes the decay of particles So, for example, the simplest thing that we have studied right from the school level or first year level is the beta decay of the neutron. So, neutron goes into a proton plus electron plus antineutrino. Okay. So, this is the weak nuclear force. Now, people have been trying to see. So, you see, all these forces, they have some mediators or some the quantas of the fields which transmit the force from one object to the other. So let us first talk about the electromagnetic force. So what happens in electromagnetic interaction? That the objects or the particles, they talk to each other via the exchange of the quantum of the gravitation electromagnetic field, which is your photon. Right. So before we knew about this quantum concept or quanta of the electromagnetic field, what did we know? We knew about the classical theory of electromagnetism. What happens in classical theory of electromagnetism? Let me illustrate things with simple examples. Let two electrons are passing by each other, or an electron and a positron, they are passing by each other. So they are charged particles. If they pass nearby, they would be able to influence the trajectories of each other. So that would be, so to say, deflecting or changing their trajectories. So classical interaction. And what happens in the quantum interaction? How is the concept different in quantum theory? In quantum theory, when one electron is propagating, or a positron, any charged particle is propagating, it emits a photon, and the other object can absorb this photon, and this is how they feel the presence of each other. You see? So the interaction takes place at the quantum level. As we say, the interaction between these two charged particles takes place via the exchange of the photon, which is the quantum of the electromagnetic field. Now, what would happen? And similarly, what happens in the strong nuclear force? There are 8 force carriers, which are called as the gluons. So 8 different kinds of gluons. And in the weak nuclear force, there are 3 force carriers, which are W plus, W minus, and G0, as they are called as. So, yes, somebody wanted to ask me something or interrupt? No? Then I continue. So these W plus, W minus, and G0, the force carriers of the electroweak interaction, gluons, the carriers of the strong interaction or the strong force, and photon, the carrier of the electromagnetic force of the electromagnetic interaction. They are all called vector bosons, because vector you need to know in your master's class. A 4-vector A mu has 4 components: A0, A1, A2, A3. Okay, so the U1 gauge field, which is photon, is given by this 4-vector A mu. Okay, and that automatically brings you to the special theory of relativity. Without that, you cannot understand the modern physics. So you see, now on the other hand, the gravitational interaction or the gravitational force, here the mediator is not a vector but a tensor, and that is your graviton. So graviton is a tensor particle. And you see, what is the how does graviton come into the picture? So let me first try to explain what is the difference between the Newtonian gravity and the Einstein gravity? So for this, let me consider two objects. Let them have the masses m1 and m2. Let they are at a distance r1 apart. I calculate the force between them, the gravitational force between them. F1 would be g m1 m2 by r1 square. Okay. Now, let me change the distance between these two objects from r1 to r2. Now, what happens? The force between them, gravitational force between them would also change. It will become F1 to F2, where F1 is given by M1 M2 by R1 square, F2 is given by M1 M2 by R2 square. Okay. Now, so when I change R1 to R2, according to Mr. Newton, the force between them, the gravitational force between them, changes instantaneously without any loss of time, with zero loss of time. But Mr. Einstein says, no, this is wrong. Nothing can move faster than light. So what about the gravitational signal? Gravitational signal, the graviton. Gravitational signal is analogous to your electromagnetic signal, which is photon. Here it is gravitational signal. So Mr. Einstein says gravitational signal also cannot move faster than light. What does it mean? It means that the force changes from F1 to F2, but not instantaneously. It takes non-zero positive amount of time in changing from F1 to F2. So I hope, so this you see, then therefore what it means, it has a very deep meaning. It means gravitational interaction also can be described, also should be described, or needs to be described in terms of a proper field theory. You see the field theory of the other three interactions, which are electromagnetic, strong nuclear, weak nuclear forces. They are summed up into a very beautiful theory, which is called as the standard model of particle physics, or standard model. And this standard model of particle physics is one of the most accurately tested theories of nature, which has been experimentally verified to several digits. You see, so standard model describes these three fundamental forces of nature and is extremely well tested experimentally. So, but this standard model does not include gravity into its picture, and the standard model is based on a relativistically invariant quantum gauge field theory. And as I just illustrated with a simple example of Newtonian versus Einstein gravity, so the gravity also must be described only in terms of a field theory. And that is the correct way, where quantum of gravitational field is a graviton. Okay. So we have a little bit better understanding about the graviton. However, these forces, you see, are gravitational interaction is much, much weaker than the other three interactions. So if I divide the strengths of all these four interactions, let us say by the strength of the strong interaction, which is responsible for describing how neutrons and protons talk to each other, or how quarks talk to each other. Okay. So, if you divide the strengths by the strength of the strong nuclear force, so so just to make a relative judgment about the strengths of the various forces, then so strong would now have strength 1. In that scale, electromagnetic interaction has scales of the order of fine structure constant 10 to the power minus 2 to 10 to the power minus 3. Weak nuclear force would have a strength of the order of 10 to the power minus 12 to minus 13. And gravitational interaction on the same scale, relative scale, would have the strength of the order of 10 to the power minus 39. So you see, this is the main difficulty, that the gravitational interaction of the gravitational force is so weak, relatively so weak, you see. So for all practical purposes, one tries to ignore, or one wants to forget about the gravitational interaction, but that's not the correct way to do it. It is there. Okay, we need to know it. So let me give you one thought experiment. Let me first tell you, supposing two protons are sitting at a distance r apart, you calculate the electrostatic force between them. Two protons sitting at a distance r apart. You can calculate Q1, Q2 by r square. Okay, where Q1, Q2 are the charges of the proton. All right. Now, you calculate the same kind of a thing for the gravitational force. You calculate the gravitational force between them, the two protons sitting at a distance r apart. You calculate these two, and then you find, if you divide one by the other, or if you compare the two, you find that the strength, the gravitational force between them is given by 10 to the power minus 39, 10 to the power minus 36 times the gravitational interaction. Now, supposing I consider a thought experiment and I accelerate these protons, what is the energy? Very well-known equation, E equal to mc square, where m is the rest mass of the particle. Supposing I accelerate these two protons to an extent of 10 to the power 18 times the rest mass, till the proton acquires energy which is 10 to the power 18 times that. So this is what is being done at the CERN Large Hadron Collider. So two proton beams, they are traveling in opposite directions, clockwise and anti-clockwise directions, and we accelerate them to give them, to increase the energy, which means to increase effective mass of the proton. Okay. So according to our present limits, I think we are not able to accelerate. I mean, so the effective masses can go up to 10 to the power 4 or 5 times the rest mass of the proton. And supposing I was able to accelerate it to 10 to the power, let us say 13 times the rest mass of the proton, then what would happen? The strength of the weak nuclear force would become equal to the strength of the gravitational force. Supposing I am able to accelerate them, supposing it's a thought experiment, supposing I am able to accelerate these protons to 10 to the power 18 times the rest mass of the proton. So you again calculate the gravitational force between them using the same simple law that you studied in first year level. And now, so 10 to the power 18 times 10 to the power 18. Okay, 10 to the power 18 times m1. m1 becomes 10 to the power 18 times the rest mass of the proton. So you get this factor of 10 to the power 18 twice, 10 to the power 36. Now at this point, what happens? The strength of the gravitational force becomes comparable with the strength of the strong nuclear force, with the strength of the electromagnetic field. So the strength of electromagnetic interaction as well as the strength of the gravitational interaction, they become the same. Whereas in your current theory that you call as standard model, the conventional particle physics is described by the so-called standard model. Now, this picture might completely change, because here in this theory, you simply neglect the gravitational interaction. You say it's so much big, it's very, very big. But now, if you are able to accelerate, you consider a scenario where these colliding particles have been accelerated to such an high energy, then what would happen? Then the electromagnetic interaction and gravitational interaction. So if you calculate correctly the factors, you can calculate that at this level, these two forces would, at 10 to the power 20, for example, now the gravitational interaction would become stronger than the strong force. It would become stronger than the strong nuclear force. It would become stronger than the weak nuclear force. It would become stronger than the electromagnetic force. You see? Now, who can predict the outcome of this thought experiment? We cannot predict the outcome of this experiment. However, the situation could be correct under some situations. You see? Now, so this is one point. You see, here we learn about the relative strengths and what kind of a role they play in describing the nature. So you see, nature, when you talk in the conventional particle physics or the standard model, you talk in terms of the so-called Feynman diagrams. Let us say a Compton scattering electron and a photon, they come and collide, and they again in the final state they give rise to an electron and a photon. Supposing you consider the electron-electron or electron-positron scattering via the exchange of a photon. Okay, so this you can describe also in terms of the so-called. So Feynman diagrams, it's a graphical pictorial description, but it has the deep meaning. I have been teaching it in quantum field theory part 2 or advanced quantum field theory at Delhi University, where I deftly show how does one construct these different Feynman diagrams, how does one calculate them in the so-called configuration space, how does one calculate them in the so-called momentum space. Okay, so all in the covariant perturbation theory, which is a generalization of the Huygens series that you study in quantum mechanics too. So if you write it in the covariant form, Mr. Einstein has already told us that the laws of nature have to be covariant, which means they have to remain invariant under the so-called Lorentz transformations. X mu goes to x prime mu equal to some matrix A mu nu times x nu. And you can calculate this matrix in terms of the partial derivatives of the primed and unprimed coordinates. Okay, so all these things you need to do. You need to understand in the first place the electromagnetism very, very properly. That is why we have courses on electrodynamics right at the beginning, first year level, electricity magnetism. Then in third year honors, we have again electrodynamics. Then so electrodynamics, and then at master's level, we again have electrodynamics, but that is called as the covariant formulation of electrodynamics. So you see, but as soon as you introduce electrodynamics, you have already introduced the idea of fields, because the vectors E and V there, they are functions of vector x and t, which means they are functions of x mu. So anything which is a function of the coordinates of the space-time manifold x, y, z, and t, then this object is a field. So that is in quantum mechanics or classical mechanics, these variables, they are functions only of time. That is the difference in mechanics and fields. So in a way, quantum mechanics is a field theory in zero space and one time dimensions. You see, so the ideas, concepts, everything is just the same. Now, let me tell you about. You have to moderate me. Tell me approximately how many minutes more do I have. I accordingly channelize my thoughts. Could anybody tell me?
Sir, you can finish in 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, fine.
Possible.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So in 20, let us say I finish it by 1 o'clock or before that. Okay, fine. So now one can understand these things from various angles in different ways. Let me tell you some interesting things beyond what one is supposed, at least in the Indian context, at the master's level. In a system like Germany, students are exposed to so-called special lecture courses, which can be on advanced field theory or gravity theory, which are beyond your usual courses. And in our Indian system, we somehow do not have it, but we need to have it. So, some important concepts like supersymmetry and super gravity and superstring theory, I would mention them only at the conceptual level. And they are, so you would come to know the meaning of graviton in a wider context. So, in the first place, let me tell you that there is a beautiful symmetry which is called as supersymmetry. In the algebraic sense, you can just think that you have bosonic variables and fermionic variables. At the school level, we don't tell our students that whatever algebra they are doing, they are dealing with bosonic variables, which are commuting. So if you write a term x into y square, or if you write y square into x, it does not give you any error or mistake in your calculation, because these variables x and y, it is assumed that they are bosonic variables. So you can flip around their positions without creating any trouble with the minus sign. But supposing they were, or some of them were fermionic variables. So fermionic variables are anti-commuting. So they can change their place, but they pick up a minus sign. Okay. So this is what you see, the advent of the fermionic variables in our physics or world of science, which has changed the entire scenario of the science. It started something like exactly 100 years ago, you can say around 1921, 22. Now we are living in 2021. So in the 1920s, you see, then there was a very famous experiment called Stern-Gerlach experiment. What you do in Stern-Gerlach experiment, you pass a beam of silver atoms, which have a silver atom has 47 electrons. So if you pass it through inhomogeneous magnetic field and you collect the spectrum on the other side, what you obtain is that you obtain two lines. But according to the theory of orbital angular momentum, which was known until that time, okay, 95 years ago or 100 years ago, people knew about orbital angular momentum, but they did not know about spin angular momentum. So the orbital angular momentum theory, the magnetic moment would be proportional to the vector L, the orbital angular momentum operator L. So, and it has eigenvalues 2L plus 1, little l, 2 into L, which is little l plus 1. So it is going to be odd number. Okay. But what you obtain in the spectrum of the Stern-Gerlach experiment is an even number. You get two lines. So even for small l equal to 0, you should get one line, but you get two lines. Then the guys called as Uhlenbeck and Goudsmit, they thought, is it possible that there is some kind of intrinsic angular momentum that the system has got? So here the fundamental constituent for the silver atom, you think in terms of the electron, 47 electrons. So does it have some intrinsic angular momentum? That turned out to be true. And that changed the entire world. You see, this is the So uh, the concept of spin uh, was born at that point of time as a result of the Stern-Gerlach experiment and the interpretation by Uhlenbeck and Gordon-Smith about this. So they introduced a new quantum number, a new concept of spin angular momentum, which does not have any classical analog. It's a purely quantum concept. It arose because of this in this quantum concept. And from there on, the entire quantum theory, quantum mechanics got changed. For that reason, sometimes people even call it as the modern quantum mechanics. You see, then in a couple of years, around 1928, Mr. Dirac wrote down the Dirac equation that describes an electron, you see. So it's a electron is a spin 1/2 particle, you see. Just 1 year later, Mr. Hermann Weyl introduced, he thought, would these electrons be massless? People thought this guy was crazy. He did not get support from the international community. In fact, he had to go through hardships of several kinds in his academic career for 10 years or so. People did not like his idea, but eventually now you describe neutrinos in terms of that. So when you put mass of the electron to be zero in the Dirac equation, the equation decouples into two Weyl equations, and they describe your neutrinos. You see, then the discovery of the positron just 1 or 2 years after Mr. Dirac wrote down the Dirac equation. So you see, this concept of spin has revolutionized the entire physics and has made it the modern quantum physics that we know today. Now, let me slightly go back to the ideas that I presented. So you have now two kinds of particles, one which are spin 1/2 or fractional spin, one kind of particle that have integer spin. So scalar and vector particle, and graviton is a tensor particle, but it's bosonic. It's an integer. 2 is not a fractional number. Now, but can there be a symmetry? So it's not just changing fermionic variables to, anti-commuting variables to commuting variables and so on. In nature, you can have bosons and fermions which are related to some symmetry, which is called the supersymmetry. So supersymmetry is a very beautiful symmetry of nature. And now, what had this thing got to do with our concept of graviton? You see, we have to be, at the moment for this particular talk, we have to remain connected with this central theme of our talk, which is graviton. So now, we obviously want to describe in our conventional particle physics include also the gravitational interaction, which has graviton as its quantum of excitation, of field excitation. We want to include this into the theory. Of course, yes, we can do it. How do we go about it? So, in the first place, we would like to make our theory. We would like to introduce supersymmetry into it. So, you have a standard model. I told you it describes nature up to several digits accurately, extremely well tested experimentally. Anomalous magnetic moment of the electron, the famous example which was measured some decades ago accurately to 7 or 8 digits or even more, and it was calculated to the same level of accuracy by the field theory in terms of 72 or 76 Feynman diagrams. If you look into the literature, you need to calculate more than 70 Feynman diagrams to be able to calculate the anomalous magnetic moment of the electron, which confronts with the experiments so well, up to several digits, 7 or 8 digits. So this means that this is the most successful theory. You see, gravity on the other hand is also a very successful theory. It describes physics of the cosmos. A standard model, particle physics, describes physics of the microcosmos, but gravity describes physics of the cosmos, physics of the solar system, neutron stars, boson stars, galaxies, physics of the universe, and so on. And relativity, general relativity, You see, special relativity was already married to quantum mechanics long ago, before the birth of so-called quantum field theory, which describes these three interactions. But so by relativity, I mean general relativity. So can general relativity also be considered within our framework? The answer is yes. So how do we do it? We go step by step. I have another 12 minutes. So now, if you introduce supersymmetry into your standard model, you achieve a so-called supersymmetric standard model. But what happens conceptually? The standard model is a gauge theory, which means a gauge theory is a theory which is invariant under local transformations. Local transformations are those that depend, the transformation parameter depends on the coordinates of the space-time manifold. Now, supersymmetry, as it is said, is has global symmetry and not a local symmetry. So it is invariant under a rigid supersymmetry transformations, where the transformation parameter does not depend on the coordinates of the space-time manifold. So now if you do that, you make your supersymmetric, construct your supersymmetric standard model, number of particles gets doubled. However, the theory loses its local symmetry. And if you try to introduce local symmetry into your supersymmetric standard model, what you get is the so-called supergravity theory. So supergravity theory is automatically, as I said, gravity. So it's a supersymmetric theory of gravity, and it includes now all the four fundamental interactions of nature into its fold. And here, so this supergravity theory is then invariant under local symmetry. But this local symmetry is an external symmetry. You can think of Poincare symmetry, space-time Poincare symmetry, where x mu goes to x mu, a mu nu x mu, plus a constant vector b mu. Okay, so in this you have not only the space-time translations but also the rotations and Lorentz boosts. Okay, so these are now so. But additionally, you get something which are called as supercharges. So a supercharge is again a spinor. You see, Dirac equation is described in terms of a spinor field psi, which is a four-component Dirac spinor. Now, so here, this supergravity theory is invariant under some local transformations, and the transformation parameter depends on the space-time coordinates of the space-time manifold, and gravity automatically comes into the picture, because here the space-time becomes curved. You see, so what is the difference in the conventional field theory and gravity theory? In one case, the space-time is flat. So ds line element ds square does not depend on g mu nu. Okay, so it depends on g mu nu, but g mu nu there is a constant, so therefore it's flat. But so either you make your space-time manifold as curved, it amounts to the same thing of introducing gravity into your theory. And if you also introduce supersymmetry into your theory, it becomes a supergravity theory. So supergravity theory, the contents of a supergravity theory are much wider than the contents of a supersymmetric standard model. You might think those people who are not, I really want to provoke you. So I want to tell you some thought-provoking ideas into it. Life does not consist only in qualifying some exams and then making to a respectable, high-salaried job. But life also consists in thinking of some beautiful things of nature. You need some people to do that, but all of us need to know it up to some extent. Okay, We don't need that each one of us becomes an Einstein. That's one Einstein is enough. But each one of us needs to know a little bit better. So we need to have a curious mind and try to understand what is happening. So here I would tell you that supergravity theory is a theory of gravity. Supersymmetric theory is a theory of quantum gravity and of zero-dimensional objects, which are particles and fluids. Why do you talk in terms of quantum gravity? The point is, you cannot explain many singularities that occur in nature, like the existence of a black hole. It's a very well-known singularity. Okay, so I mean, recently this year's Nobel Prize has gone to the discovery of a massive superhole sitting somewhere in the center of our galaxy, the Milky Way. You see, so there are some brave people, you see, and the advancement goes conceptual, mathematical, experimental, technical, side by side. You need some people who are experts in different areas. This American woman physicist, in addition to Roger Penrose, who talked about the existence of a massive, supermassive black hole in the center of the galaxy. This woman, Andreas Ghez, sitting in California, she was able to measure, she spent, you see, this one particular star called SO2, a star or some such star, it takes 16 years to take one revolution about this massive, supermassive black hole. How many days we need to make a revolution around our sun? Our Earth takes 365 days to make a rotation. Okay, Mercury takes much smaller days. So now, what happens when your Earth comes back to the after one revolution? It does not come back exactly at the same point. But so the axis of this elliptical orbit, the major axis of this elliptical orbit, has rotated a little bit. So this is called as advance of perihelion. So it's more accurately measurable for, because it's more appreciable for the motion of Mercury, Buddha. So, and it was 1841, you see, when a French astronomer, I think Leverrier or somebody, who measured it accurately, the advance of perihelion of Mercury. And theoretically, general theory of relativity, you can calculate this advance of perihelion in this general theory of relativity accurately, and it tallies with what Mr. Leverrier found it in 1841, this astronomer. What has this got to do with our supermassive black hole sitting in the center of our galaxy? So then this guy, this one particular star she chose, there must be several objects that are revolving around this guy, supermassive black hole. But this team of this Nobel laureate Andreas Ghez, they picked up one particular object and they traced its trajectory. It took 16 years to complete one orbit. So she was able to accurately measure the advance of perihelion of this guy in its revolution around this supermassive black hole sitting at the center of our galaxy. So the idea was that these black holes, they present the best known examples of singularities. The best well-known example is the Big Bang. You see, the universe was born at the time of Big Bang, which is 13.7 billion years ago. And you see, at the time of Big Bang, all the fundamental laws of nature were already born at that time, 13.7 billion years ago. We are trying to learn them now, understand them now, measure them, their predictions now, but they were predicted at that very time. So if you run the universe backwards in time, it hits upon a singularity called as the Big Bang. So your general relativity also fails there. Conventional general relativity, field theory of general relativity, breaks down near as you approach a singularity, whether it's a black hole or a Big Bang or whatever. And there you need to understand the things correctly, and for that you need a theory of quantum gravity. So supergravity, as I said, is one of the simplest examples of a theory of supergravity. It has some limitations, but it has predictive power and it is finite order by order in perturbation theory. But it could even be the correct theory. For example, in n equal to 8 example, I want to tell you in particular, n equal to 8 supersymmetry, which means 8 supersymmetries in the theory. It's called extended supersymmetry. If I consider a theory of a supergravity theory, then there is a concept of helicity. I am running short of time. I could continue to talk and talk, but your time limit is approaching. So this, with the concept of helicity, you can, if you have 8 supercharges in your theory, you apply it to a state with helicity 2, which is the graviton, has helicity 2. Then, if you apply the supercharged ones, it annihilates the state and produces a state with helicity reduced by 1/2. So, a spin 3/2 or a helicity 3/2 particle, which is called as a gravitino. So, gravitino, and if you apply 8 different supercharges, so you have 8 gravitinos in this theory with n equal to 8 supersymmetry. And if you apply 2 supercharges on the same state, it annihilates it twice. So you get a spin 1 particle, a vector particle. Then you apply it again, you get a spin 1/2 particle. You apply it again, you get a spin 0 particle. You continue to apply these supercharges, 8 or their combinations. So you construct a spectrum. You start with a graviton with helicity +2, you end up with a graviton with helicity -2. So +2, +3/2, +1, +1/2, 0, -1/2, -1, -3/2, and -2. And you can also calculate the number of these particles. It would be 1, 8, 28. It is given by NCR. Okay. So 1, 8, 28, 56, 70 scalars. And then on the other side, they are also, so this gives a complete picture. So n equal to 8 supersymmetry I have mentioned, supergravity theory I have mentioned, because this gives you a kind of a unified picture. And you see here, so this, and the way you construct this helicity is in terms of a Pauli-Lubansky polarization vector and the generator of the Lorentz space translations P mu. So one can think of a superparticle which has got these different particles as different polarization states of the same particle. This could even be a supergraviton with its different polarization states, 8 gravitinos, 28 vectors, 56 fermions with spin 1/2, 70 scalars spin 0, and then on the other side with negative helicity. And then in another 2-3 minutes, I would mention that there is another possibility that instead of considering 0-dimensional particles and fields, I go to 1-dimensional objects which are extended in space and time. I again construct the field theory of these extended objects called as the strings or superstrings. And here, the mass spectrum of the closed superstring theory contains as a subset all these things that I have just mentioned to you in the name of supergravity. So, for example, n equal to 1 supergravity would have 1 graviton and 1 graviton. This is the gravity supermultiplier. If I have 2 supersymmetry, which was the Einstein's dream theory of unification of electromagnetism with gravity, you have 1 graviton, 2 gravitinos, and 1 vector photon. And these things are obtained as a subset in the mass spectrum of the superstring theory. You see, so the real challenge before us at the moment lies from the point of view of experiments as well as theory, technological advancement, scientific advancement, mathematical advancement, and conceptual advancement on the top of all these things, that superstring theory is valid for energy ranges which are greater than 10 to the power 18 GeV. Supergravity theory is applicable below that energy range. And what is observable physics is described by standard model or supersymmetric standard model, which is at the ordinary energy scales that we see in the nature or in the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. So we have to bridge the gap between these. We have to go either from observational physics to supergravity theory to superstring theory, bottom up approach, or we have to have bottom down approach. We start with superstring theory, we come down to supergravity theory, we further come down to the observable supersymmetric standard model and make contact with the observational physics. And so, you see, I have given you some, and this, to conclude, these gravitons you obtain in the mass spectrum of the closed superstring theory. In supergravity theory, I have told you in short, this is the best I could do in this much available time. So you have these graviton, gravitinos, and vectors, supergravity multiplex. Okay. And I gave you the most difficult example is that of n supersymmetries. And you see the number of Feynman diagrams would be too large. And you really need brave people to calculate them. And you really need brave people to develop the corresponding technology and experimentation on the other side. You see, so you need scientists, you need engineers, you need thinkers, you need everybody, you see, to be able to proceed further. So it's not Mr. DSK alone also cannot do much. You see, I can only provoke you, give you some thought-provoking ideas and maybe lectures so that, but eventually younger people like you have to work, you see. It's the future of the nature, discovery, understanding of the nature, mankind, it depends on the younger people like you. And so I entrust this responsibility to bright younger friends like you. And I like to express my very, very sincere thanks to the distinguished audience for their very kind patience of putting up with me for 40-45 minutes now. And with that, let me conclude my talk. This is not going to be the end of the world. Okay, in my teaching at Delhi University, I sometimes say, one of my students pointed it out to me, called Subham Rana. He told me, I had forgotten, but I recollected. Yes, I told, मैं कोई गुजरा हुआ वक्त भी नहीं हूँ जो कि वापस फिर से ना आ सकूं. आप जब बुलाएंगे, I would be back again with you. With those words, I thank you all, your entire team, your entire participants, with my lots of best wishes to all of you. Thank you very, very much. All the best.
Thank you, sir. So with this note, we want a promise to you that you would be continuing the next upcoming days with the Graviton.
Okay, sure.
Thanks for this nice talk and a very informative talk. So any audience who wants to ask any question or wants to interact with Professor DSK, so we have 5 to 10 minutes for the interaction section. If you want to interact, if you have any kind of doubt, you can want to ask anything. You can ask anything with him.
Sure, all questions are valid.
Okay, feel free to
any absurd questions. Don't worry about this.
Okay, so I have one question. Okay, you can ask. Continue, please.
Thank you so much, sir, for this very interesting talk. very informative talk, and you have explained the things in a very simple, very interesting way. So I just wish to ask that for a lay person, if one wants to read about this supergravity and superstring theory, so can you suggest some article or some book?
Yes, sure. That's a very, very important question, very beautiful question. And let me address it to everybody. So the best thing is, you see, the first year level students should concentrate on what is mechanics. Try to work out each and every step. Try to read basic concepts of mechanics, special relativity. In the first place, classical mechanics is most important thing, you see. So because it is the classical theories which are the richest theories, and you construct their corresponding quantum theories through standard procedures. And so classical mechanics is the most important. Then you can couple it with special theory of relativity. You can construct relativistic mechanics. You can construct quantize the theory. You can construct quantum mechanics. Then you introduce a special theory of relativity into it. Try to construct relativistic quantum mechanics, and there you end up with equations like Klein-Gordon equation, Dirac equation, and so on. All right. And in classical mechanics gives you the principle which is called as the variational principle. So you start with any action and you use the variational principle, you end up with some equations of motion. They describe things for you. So in classical mechanics, the entire information is contained in the definition of the Lagrangian or the action of the theory. Whether it's mechanics or field theory or supergravity theory or superstring theory, everywhere you need those concepts, very first few concepts that you learn in classical mechanics. Okay. In quantum mechanics, the entire information is contained in the definition of the state vector. State vector, or synonymously the wave function. So if I take a state vector alpha and I take its scalar product with some x prime, and I construct a wave function in the configuration space, I multiply its scalar product with p prime, I construct a wave function in the momentum space. So you see, and then the Klein-Gordon equations and Dirac equations are there even in the relativistic quantum mechanics. So what happens if you talk about them in field theory? In field theory, they are field equations. In relativistic quantum mechanics, they are equations that describe single particle motion. So they are relativistic single particle wave equations. In field theory, they are the field equations derived using the variational principle from some action or Lagrangian of a theory. So they are field equations, and this is the main difference in relativistic quantum mechanics and relativistic quantum field theory. And so here you also introduce the concept of metric. We will do it some other times for sure. And if you make the space-time curved, okay, so your line element ds square, if I had time, I would explain. It's a generalization of the Pythagoras theorem of measuring. If you are sitting in a room, you have three dimensions, dx, dy, dz. So sum of dx square plus dy square plus dz square is the square of the diagonal ds square. This ds square is called as the line element. Okay, so you generalize the Pythagoras theorem from 3 Euclidean space to 4-dimensional Minkowski space. You introduce one time dimension also, and with the Lorentzian signature. So the signatures of the terms in dt square and dx square, they have to be opposite of each other. That is the meaning of Lorentzian signature. So you need to actually clarify, thresh out, understand the basics, which are really cannot be classified into classical or quantum or mechanics or field theory. They are the basic concepts, are just the basic concepts which hold true everywhere, you see. And this is what you do also in, so I mean, whether you talk in terms of standard model or supersymmetric standard model or further generalized supergravity theory, everywhere you write if you want to start with the classical level, so you define a action or a Lagrangian, use the variational principle, obtain the equations of motion, construct the corresponding quantum theory. So here you will have the corresponding quantum theory would be a quantum field theory. And now this would be in a curved space-time, okay? Not in a flat space-time. And this is for zero-dimensional objects. For there are additional issues with the why does one go to string theory? It's not a fancy thing that I love mathematics or I like to do complicated things. No. Actually, in the first three interactions, the singularity at r equal to 0 is being smeared out by the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. But in gravity theory, there is no such counterpart of a Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So singularity at r equal to 0 in the gravitational interaction, m1 m2 by r square, cannot be smeared out using the conventional Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So what one has to do is one has to sort of generalize the uncertainty principle in the sense, so delta x is, let us say, h cross by delta p plus a constant which is denoted by alpha prime, which is the Rajai slope, very famous constant in the literature, you can know it, times delta p by h cross. So what happens if you write down Feynman diagrams for the calculation of any physical process in conventional field theory, the distances delta x can go all the way up to 0 and momentas can go all the way up to infinity. And that gives rise to divergences in the theory, in the results. So, but you have to make sense out of it. Now, if you generalize this uncertainty principle, what happens? Now, delta x does not go all the way to 0 and delta p does not go all the way up to infinity. So those divergences are being taken care of. And therefore, the super string theory is a super renormalizable theory, which does not give rise to infinities arising because of the zero-dimensional interaction vertices, because now the interaction vertices are spreaded in space and time. So I would like to suggest to you that in the first place, try to look at all the basic fundamental concepts, beginning from mechanics, relativity, quantum mechanics, the elementary non-relativistic quantum mechanics, then go to relativistic quantum mechanics, go to special relativity, try to marry quantum mechanics with special relativity, you construct quantum field theory, go further, try to find out shortcomings, what are the things that you still need to know and that you do not know. And for each and every individual of us, we know our weaknesses, we know what we do not know so well. So we have to fill up the gaps by ourselves, you see. And that keeps you easy, you see. I mean, this is my main driving force. This keeps me going, I think, and I try to understand. And if I have some good audience like you, I try to explain also. So have I answered your question to some extent? The answer has to be a big one, a vast, because your question was so fundamental. And
hope she will get the answer.
Yes, sir.
So
yes.
So with that,
thank you so much, sir.
We have some time limited. So if anybody wants to ask question, we will share Professor DSK's contact or his email ID with you all. So you can directly ask to them after this occasion also.
Oh, so sure. You're always welcome. I do that actually very happily. Yeah, many students and young friends of mine from various corners of the world, actually, they remain in touch with me all the time. They keep asking me something and I try to help and explain things.
That is your kind gesture, sir.
No, that is the best use of my life. I read and try to understand things. Yes, they need to be transferred to the people.
Yes, sir. Good.
Otherwise, what is the use? You collect many things in your mind and you die.
Yes. So, thank you, Professor DSK, for such a nice and informative talk. So I surely said that it will enhance the knowledge of all the participants, and Really, it's wonderful talk. So personally, I am not expert in this field, but I learned a lot from this.
Actually, I'm not even talking of a particular field. I'm just talking of some basic fundamentals.
So, even though there are no slides, it involves a lot of mathematics also. But you make it so interactive. So
the idea is not to frighten the people. It's not. Idea is not to that. But you need equally high level of advancement in